what
Mhm.
would one expect over, I don't know, a 6 or 12 month time period to sort of improve in the length of the penis?
Yeah.
Is there like, do you have any evidence about this, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, look, like
Yeah,
I would say it's impossible over time to grow more than 2 inches. I just think that's just not biologically possible with it relates to your penis.
yeah,
If you do the exercises consistently, you have a good workout routine, and you're doing all this stuff like over a 6 to 12 month period, like half inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch, like if you really do it properly. But
mm,
that's like, every day for a year, right? Not a lot of people have the ability to do things like that consistently.
yeah.
And
And
then
also,
birth,
Jackson, like if you were to like ask any man, would a half to an inch extra be desirable? I mean, like it's just like that's
it's exponential.
yeah. Well, it's great to meet you, man. It's really a pleasure to get to speak to you one to one. I've been listening to a lot of your videos and things like that on the Instagram for a little ways now, so I really appreciate
Nice.
you coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I guess, look, the first question I have for you is like, how does one fall into the the situation where he's coaching men about sex and intimacy and sexual positions and all those sorts of things? What was the genesis of all of
Through epic failure
that?
as
Yeah,
as a young
usually
man,
goes. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know. Look, I my background is training martial arts, sports discipline, right? You always have a
yeah.
teacher, you always have,
Really nice.
and from a very young age, I was, 4 years old and I started in those crafts. And I've always been really interested in intimacy and being with women, and it's a beautiful experience that we get to have as humans, right? And when
Sure.
you're a teenager, you're fumbling around, right? And so I, for whatever reason, I had the foresight of like, okay, well, if I've always trained and learned from masters in these other areas, like there's got to be some people that know what they're doing in this particular area, so that you
Mm,
don't get that feedback over and over and over again of like, hey, you don't really know what's going on and what you're doing. So
yeah,
instead of letting it hit my ego, I was like, okay, painful, yes, took the note, and then let's go and learn about these things. And this was, 20 years ago. So you didn't have Instagram and Facebook had just started, so it was a very different landscape.
yeah, yeah. It's. Do you think there's something about having a coach when you're younger that you kind of don't have a you don't have a problem with being coachable or wanting to learn or being told what to do? Is that something that you think you relate to?
I think it's both. One is that if you have a coach and they're good and they know how to train you,
Mm.
it changes your perspective on coaching. The second is I think some people are born with the capacity to just like sit there and listen and learn because they know where they're at in the scheme of things. Having a disciplined mentality is like you'll probably be able to coachable if you have a lot of discipline, right?
Um,
Some people have more of that than others. It doesn't mean that you can't learn it. But it just means that, I started martial arts when I was 4. I did it for 2.5 hours a day for 4.5 years to get my
wow.
black belt when I was 7.5. So
No
that's
way.
that's
Yeah.
not just like not
Like,
everyone can do that.
yeah.
There are a few people who have that skill. So I think I have the discipline gene, right? I know that. And then it's having someone who you respect, admire, and appreciate who is putting time in working with you. And you're like, okay, well,
Sure.
this works. Then you apply it across every aspect of your life.
Mm. Do you think you were always a good teacher as well? Is that something that's
It's a
come
great
from your
question.
childhood?
Have I always been a good teacher? I love teaching and educating and sharing when people have a genuine interest.
Sure.
I think
Have
obviously
people always come
as
up to you to sort of ask for advice when you were
yeah,
younger? Is that something?
they've always been like, well, how do you do this? Like you're good
Sure.
at this, etc. But I wouldn't say it really was fleshed out until my mid 20s to early 30s when where there was like, wow, like you've been doing, you look X, you look like this, like what have you been doing? Or
Sure.
you do this, or what have you been doing? When you're younger, it's like you're all trying to figure it out at the same time. But in that 25 to 30, 35 range is when it really started to pick up.
Mm.
Because then you develop light mastery, I mean, again, mastery is more when you're 50s and 60s, I believe. But you
Sure.
develop light skills where people are like, okay, got it. He's good at this, you know?
Yeah, right. When did you flip the switch in terms of, I guess, learning in the trenches versus putting it all together and teaching people?
So great question. So I started learning this stuff like 26-ish, and then I was always doing it on the side of my personal professional endeavors, right? Like I had companies doing, other things, entrepreneurship. Um, I went on a vision quest in 2019
Hmm.
and out in the woods for 5 days, no food, by myself in the Basque region of France as part of like a I don't know. I was like, I asked one of my friends, I said, what's the most powerful thing you've done in your life to help you, get to the next level of where you're at? And he's like, this, go do a vision quest. So I did it. And I
Wow.
actually downloaded the whole concept while I was there, right? There's no technology. All you have is a notebook and a phone and some water and a tent. And so I downloaded this whole concept of like, how do you be of service? How do you help men? How do you take all the things that you've learned through martial arts training, erotic arts training, discipline, sports, school, framework, things like that, and then put it into some sort of, program that is relatable to men. Now, I didn't start the business until early like 2022, and I didn't launch my first product until 2023. So it wasn't like an exact, like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this right now after my vision quest. It was COVID. It was a weird time for people to
Yeah.
be
Oh,
starting companies.
yeah, COVID was weird for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. What I like about your, I guess, approach to things is you don't, you have an ability to meld together the kind of close intimacy, exploration, communication, understanding your woman and your partner, being able to be open, vulnerable, as well as sort of blending that with fantasy and desire and eroticism and all of those things. How is that something that you've cultivated? Is that a part of you in terms of like just bringing through your own personality, or is this another epic fail that you kind of modeled a bad teacher, for example, and you're kind of
Mm.
trying to be something that's portrayed like in porn or whatever it is, and then you try it out in the field and it's just like not working. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Well, through the years, obviously, and when I was doing my training and learning for I would say like 10, 12 years on the side, you learn things and then you take them into your personal life and whether you're with a girlfriend, you're with a lover, whatever it may be, and you try things and then sometimes there are those epic fails and then you learn very quickly. Um, my approach is basically this, like one, you have to understand your body, and two, you have to understand her body. And you have to understand that men and women are incredibly different. We speak different languages, we operate differently. Men are visual creatures and we are stimulated by a stimulus that says that woman is attractive, I am turned on. That's not the way that women are turned on, right? And so if you don't learn some of this stuff and then bring it into those scenarios, you don't have the tools. You don't have the proper tools. Learning from porn, right? I always say like it teaches you all the wrong moves because women don't like to have sex like that. And if they do, it's only sort of at the very end of the experience when they're fully, they've been enraptured, so to speak, right? They're full surrender and you can do some of that stuff. But it really comes down to like, are you present in that experience with this person or are you performing? Are you performative, right? And so porn is a movie and they're performing, right? And so when you mimic stuff like that, it shows. I ask my female friends like, is it really obvious when a guy watches porn that when you're hooking up with them? And they're like, yeah, and I'm like, well, what? Like, they're like, he's just not really there with me. He's doing something to me, but he's not present with me in the experience. So I guess to answer your question, there's been lots of trials and errors, throughout my whole, life, and basically like I take what I've learned from the masters, and I take what I've learned from my experience with, with women, and then I blend it in a way that like I'm just trying to get guys to think about it a little bit differently, right, in a really relatable sort of pragmatic way, so that they can be in their best mindset and also in their body to perform the best, but not feel like it's a performance. I know it's a weird way that I describe it.
Yeah. Can we flesh that out a little bit? I mean, I
Mhm.
think I get in my own personal experience, and then also just talking with like, my brother and my mates and things like that about particularly porn and things like that, is there's there's almost like a defense on one side in terms of defending. There's probably a few things that'll come into this, and I wouldn't mind you sort of working through it
Hmm.
all, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Is like, okay, well, porn has become the first port of call to teach us how to have sex, right? Like sex education at school is an absolute fucking flop. Like
Mhm.
you don't learn really anything other than like, I don't know, not to have babies or, sort of like a
Right.
cautionary thing, that sort of thing. But then you get introduced to porn and then you're kind of learning from, like you said, actors that are, it's all pieced together. And as time sort of evolved, it gets harder and faster and all the rest of it. And you do see women, you will notice when they've experienced something like that, or partners that have been educated through porn, is because it is hard and fast. It's over and done with in a short period of time. The expectation is almost like, you're gonna sort of, fuck me like you hate me sort of thing, and then it's going to be over and all that
Yeah.
kind of jazz. But then there's also back to the defending, like, there's a defense against. It's okay to sort of watch it. It's okay to masturbate, every day, that sort of thing. But I mean, I guess you don't think about this when you're 20, but now, like for me, I'm 47. So,
Hmm.
you think about your energy, you think about like your vitality. You're very conscious about where your energy flows and your attention goes, right? So,
Yeah.
can we speak to
Absolutely.
all of that and its impacts? I mean, I've got three young boys, right? My boys are
Yeah.
18, 15, and 13. So they're going through that age of, dude, it's on their phone. I mean, it's readily available. I had to
Mhm.
go and fish for my dad's pornos, in the bottom drawer somewhere at home. We didn't have
I
anything
know.
on tap, right?
I
So anyway,
know.
it's a long, long question, and there's a lot in.
Yeah, well, yeah, so I'll sort of think about in piecemeal it. So, the first part is you were talking about, it's learning these moves, right? And learning like this is where we learn from because there's really nothing else that's really readily available. There's more stuff nowadays, right? There's also porn that's more intimate, more slow, more connected. But sexual education it's awful. There really is none. And so then where do kids go, right? You look at your phone, you look at porn, you're trying to see these things that people are doing. What guys don't realize is porn causes, there's three things that it causes, like scientifically proven. One is erectile dysfunction, no matter how old you are. Two is performance anxiety, and three is premature release. So it'll get you either way, and it's going to teach you the wrong things to do when you're intimate with a partner. The problem is it's become so normalized, right? And I think it's like yeah, every like third download is porn or something like that. The top 17 of 100 search sites in the world are porn. It's so readily available, yet it's so um, inconsistent with your actual experience with a partner, right? And that's the issue. We live in a sexualized culture, but we're never taught sex. We're never taught how to actually connect. We're never taught about a woman's body unless it's a biology class and you're not actually learning like the intimacy. You're just learning the biology parts of it, right? And we forget all that stuff. We don't remember any of that stuff anyway. Um, so, and with regard to like the energy component, right? You talked about you're 47 years old. I'm 41. I didn't think about this when I was 18. I was just
Yeah.
going at it, right? And so there's also a difference, let's talk about masturbation for a little bit. So masturbation, totally fine. What are you watching and how frequently are you doing it? Those are the questions that I ask, right? Because I've have a whole matrix that I put together, which is basically how much neural demand is when you're masturbating or self-pleasuring, how much neural demand is there? And then like, what's your dopamine level, as it relates to that? And this is what we get into with the porn-induced erectile dysfunction, which is a whole epidemic that's happening to men under 30 years old. Guys under 30 aren't supposed to have ED. But when you watch porn a lot and you get addicted and your dopamine path gets totally screwed up and it needs that harder, faster, which you talked about, like more intense novelty experience. Because that's what dopamine seeking novelty. And so the guys who create porn, they know like we need to get this higher and higher. There's not a lot of, neural demand when you're watching hardcore porn. There's basically none, but your dopamine gets so high. And so that is a real issue that we're having right now.
Mm.
When you're using your imagination or when you had your Playboy and it was a static image, you have high neural demand. You have to look at that and then imagine something that's happening to get you stimulated and turned
Right.
on,
Right.
right? High neural
Visualize.
demand, lower dopamine creation, but that's okay, right?
Mm.
Because what happens is there's a gap between the dopamine that's created during visually watching porn and the dopamine that's created when you're in an intimate experience with a partner. That gap is what creates ED. Whereas if you take the other side of it, right, when you're just imagining something and you're listening to audio erotic or you're looking at a static image, that gap is okay because the dopamine that's created in those situations is actually less than when you're with a partner. So your dopamine, you don't have that sort of like negative dopamine experience. So you're
Mhm.
going to be able to get aroused. But there's a huge epidemic which is happening right now, which I talk about a lot. It's addiction to porn, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, and then pharmaceutical companies selling young guys Viagra, generic Viagra, Cialis, Tadalafil, Blue Chew, Roman, whatever these companies are doing, right? They're
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies.
Mm.
And then it's like digital dating, and then, digital arousal versus like real natural seduction skills. So you get into these things, but it all starts with, well, porn is present in all of this, right? So
Yeah.
I think masturbation is fine. It's just what are you watching and how often are you doing it and how old are you and are you releasing every time or not,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
So when I teach, I basically have these sort of like guidelines for guys. It's like, hey, if you're this age and you're healthy, you can release X number of times, per week, right? For optimal vitality, we'll call it. I don't want you to watch porn. Use your brain, right? And so we get them into better training methods. But again, it's prevalent, right? If you're not blocking the technology with an app on your kids' phones, they're probably going to access it,
Yeah.
and they're going to access it on their friends' phones. But there are things that you can do to curb, their random use of it. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of interesting sort of like side conversations that come up from this.
Mm. Yeah. I also think like my personal experience is that, and I've spoken to other coaches in the past about this too, is kind of when you watch porn, you release immediately, like it's a very quick succession, and so you if you bring that into the bedroom, well, then you're just sort of like, hammering in porn and then you're hammering in the
Yeah.
bedroom, and so it kind of repeats itself.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too, Jackson, is like I found that when I started to really reduce and significantly pull back on porn consumption, that there was a gap between having to stimulate my mind enough in order to get to arousal. And it took a long time. And honestly, it was almost frustrating to a
Yeah.
point. Does that make sense? Like, does that resonate
A
with you? It's
thousand
just like,
percent. Yeah.
yeah, it's just like you get to the point where you're like, man, I can't be. It's almost like I can't be bothered. It's just taking too long. So
Hmm.
you've trained your mind to kind of like get there super quick, and I think that it's a danger and it's a disconnect for men. But I wanted to get your take on it because, like you said when we first started talking, women are sort of a slow burn. Men, we're already like primed to kind of
Hmm.
rapid fire. We're already there.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of marry those two together? Because as a man, you kind of, you want to get to that sort of stimulation. When we're talking about masturbation and things like that, I don't know. For me personally, I'd rather not do it than spend half an hour trying to climax. Does
Yeah.
it make sense? I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, of
It
course.
sounds bad when I say it out
No,
loud, but
it's
you know what I
it's no,
mean?
it's a great topic. So a couple things. First off, you play like you practice, and your body and your muscles habituate to certain behaviors, right?
Mm,
So when we talk about porn causing premature ejaculation, you're in there, you hit it, you quit it, it's quick. Your body says, "Oh, that was a minute, that was 30 seconds, that was whatever it was," right?
mm,
And the body gets used to that over time, right? You can't do something over and over and over again, and the body's like, "Oh, I'm not going to learn from this." The body learns, right? And it's about unlearning that behavior, right? So that's the first part, is that you play like you practice, and quick releases during watching, pornography are going to create quicker experiences when you're with a partner. On the other side of it, where you talk about like, okay, cool. So I've sort of stopped watching as much porn, right? And now my dopamine levels are getting a little bit more normalized,
mm,
And so it sometimes takes a little bit longer for me to get aroused while stimulating myself, whether it's a picture, whether it's something on Instagram or a video or whatever we watch that isn't pornography. Um, this is where this concept of like edging comes in, right? And it's tricky because I get a lot of feedback from guys being like, well, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to self-pleasure and then not release? It's
Yeah.
like, well, you play like you practice. So
Mm.
guys that have issues with premature ejaculation, the first thing I say is, number one, stop watching porn for a certain period of time, cold turkey. The second is when you start back up self-pleasuring, you can't come every time, right? I want you to actually edge. And so this concept of edging, I'm sure you're familiar with it, but it's basically you bring yourself up to a threshold and then you kind of pause and you ride the wave. And then you bring it down and then you bring it up again and you pause and ride the wave. Just like you do a rep at the gym, right? Some reps are, superset max and some sets are just like, time under tension. You need to work with your body in that part in the same way. It doesn't
Mm.
just automatically do stuff really well, unless you're gifted, right? LeBron James is a gifted basketball player. We can all shoot a basketball, but we can't all play like LeBron James. Sometimes you have to work and you have to actually train your body to last longer. So if you're a guy who's a quick buster under a minute, whatever it is, you gotta work at it. So I would say in that scenario, you have to spend 10 minutes pleasuring yourself to understand what it feels like to receive 10 minutes of pleasure so that you can then potentially do that in the bedroom, right?
Mm.
I know it sounds weird, but again, thinking of it like a sport, everything that you do, you need to mimic those types of movements. That's why I have a whole sexual fitness, program in my app because it's like guys have really shitty hip mobility. They can't move
Yeah.
their hips all that well. They can't get into different positions. So let's train like we want to get into our hips better, right? So you can get into different angles and whatnot. So for me, it's all like everything that you do, you have to have a reason why you're doing it, right? And so if you learn how to edge, number one, you can last longer. You increase the capacity for her to experience pleasure so that that orgasm gap starts to get a little bit smaller, right? Because right now it's very high.
Mm.
Um, you know how like when I talk about orgasm gap, like heterosexual women are the least orgasms out of any type of gender or sex because heterosexual men have the most orgasms because they just go in, do their thing, and then it's done.
Mm.
So, yeah, do you want to go for 30 minutes every time you self-pleasure? Um, no. But maybe once a week when you're like, cool, I'm gonna like think of this as like my workout and I'm gonna practice as I would be in a partnership situation where I do want to have a longer session, right? 30 minutes isn't needed every time, but it's good to switch it up and have a little bit of variety so that your body doesn't get
Yeah.
attuned to something. You know what I mean?
Totally. It makes total sense. I mean, I think you you don't maybe you don't want to be self-pleasuring for 30 minutes, but you certainly want to be lasting 30 minutes in the bedroom. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
so I mean, there's a motivator, there's a big carrot dangling there. It's in order to want to practice and like you said, get in the game a bit
Yeah.
better. So you're prepared for game day sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Pun
uh,
intended. Big dangling carrot. But
yeah,
like,
for sure.
but and that's the thing where it's like I tell guys, look, are you willing to put in any work? We sort of think that like we're just gonna automatically be really good at sex.
Yeah,
That's like the furthest thing from the truth. And that's why so many people are so bad at it because they don't take the time to train, to listen, to learn, to understand, and bring those skills in like you would any other subject or craft that you want to be really good at.
for sure.
Right.
But I think what I love about your the way that you teach too, Jackson, is like it's almost it's not almost it's a mindset shift to put yourself in the frame that I'm going to take not a back step, but I'm going to put my desire for ejaculation on the back burner for as long as I can to allow my partner to climax as many times. It's a very selfless but also selfish, I don't know, paradox in a sense. I
Yeah.
get to last
Yeah.
longer. This whole experience lasts, 3 or 4 times as long. You get to climax multiple times. You get the praise and the recognition for being a beast in the bedroom. Like,
Yeah.
there's
It,
so many kind of
it's
like
a shift.
good
Yeah.
little playoffs around all that,
Yeah.
you know?
You hit the nail on the head. Like it's a you have to sort of explain like by the way if you think about it differently, right? You're going to have a way better sexual experience overall because of the things that you just mentioned. But it's
Okay.
like, wait, but I want this short-term pleasure. So you have to see the forest for the trees. Like, but I want this thing. I want to feel good. But what if you did these other things that may make you actually feel better and also keep your energy and keep your power and keep your vitality, right? When you learn how
Mhm.
to cultivate that energy. That's what we learn about in, Taoism, which is like the cultivation of that sexual energy. You talk, you're 47, when you release, I'm sure you feel a certain way when you release, right? Same thing with me. I feel a certain way. When I was younger, I didn't feel it as much, but now I'm like, okay, got it. Refractory period's a little bit longer. So,
Sure.
especially as men get into their 30s and, 40s and 50s, the less frequent ejaculation is better for their male vitality, right? We don't want to be going so much. And that's also hard for guys to be like, well, but it feels good. I'm like, of course it feels good. But what is it doing to your body? You're releasing hormones that make you completely satiated. I call it sleepy puppy.
Yeah,
Prolactin is
yeah.
released, which is what women who are breastfeeding, they give to their kids. And that's why the kids sleep after they breastfeed because they're
Mm.
completely satiated. And so that sleepy puppy, how do we get rid of the sleepy puppy and get more of into our, like healthy, positive, driven focus, like I got this, and then you
Yeah,
can go again if you want to, or if you're in a
yeah.
situation where it's possible.
Yeah, you mentioned like edging and things like that. What are your thoughts on, or can you first maybe explain for anyone who's listening about like the benefits of semen retention and edging and things like that? Because I've heard a number of things myself. And when I've tried it myself, and I've had long periods of like just not climaxing at all.
Mhm.
Um, and, but I got to tell you, like, I had not experienced what I thought I was going to, which was, I don't know, some fucking enlightenment experience that I thought I was going to maybe get to.
Yeah.
But that's not, that's only my personal take on it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't
It's
mind sort of exploring that sort of technique around that, and some other things around sort of preparing yourself for the vitality of getting into the bedroom and being at your peak performance.
Yeah. So what I like to do is I start with basically explaining you have to understand at the very highest level that a male's semen, right, our ejaculation is life force, right? It is we have the ability to create life with that energy. So yes, there is a physical liquid, semen, seminal fluid, and there's also the energy that is created in that region when you are engaging in sexual activity. So that's the first thing, is that if you understand how vital that energy source is, right, and you put its like level of importance as high, then you can get into this with a much easier sort of mindset. If you don't understand that your sexual vitality is like, in Taoism, they explain this as like you only have a certain amount of releases and
Mm,
then you're done. You've lost your life force, right? When you're sick, what's the last thing you do when you're sick?
yeah, for sure.
You're not masturbating when you're
Yeah.
sick. You're not having sex when you're sick because you want to conserve
A
all
lot
of
of
that
energy.
energy.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is when you engage in a practice of edging, um, it's hard to do, right? It's hard to do. You're cultivating the liquid and it's moving up the vas deferens and all that sort of stuff. And the part of it that's difficult is knowing when to stop, when to pause, right? And so I call this the magic eight. The magic eight is 8 out of 10 you're good. If you go past an 8 out of 10, you know that you got to release, right? You've had that experience where you're like, I'm trying to do it, you just can't, and you have to go. So between 7 and 8, right? That sort of mindset, I'm gonna pause and slow and stop, and then do some breath work and bring that energy, the energy to a different place, right? You can bring it up here and you get high. When you know how to do it, you can get high and you
Mm,
feel really powerful. Like when you do breath work or Wim Hof or something like that, you know how you feel like you have like this super conscious state? It's the
euphoric.
exact same feeling that you can get from the energy cultivation down there that you basically bring up, right, to this part of your head and bring it up the spine into the front, right?
Wow.
So they teach this in Taoism and in Tantra, but it's basically you're bringing the energy that's created during that arousal up. Okay. Now you keep bringing that energy up, right? You're going to feel really fucking good. Do you
Mm,
feel exactly like you do when you release? No. but you also don't feel the refractory and like the sluggishness and the satiatedness that you feel when you release for, an hour or so afterwards, right?
Yeah. But that seems to be the
So
key though, Jackson, because like from my experience and what you just told me is that if you just stop releasing, it's almost like that energy's trapped. But if you redirect it through breath work,
yeah,
then it's almost like pulling that life force through
yes.
to other parts of the body.
Exactly. So, guys talk about blue balls, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, we get blue balls. Blue balls is because either you've gone too far and the liquid is too far up and you've stopped and you actually need to release,
Hmm.
or it's that feeling of like heavy energy in your balls because that energy hasn't been moved up to the higher centers, you know? And
Yeah.
so, look, it's nuanced. It's not like I think everyone's going to understand this stuff right away. But when you get into it, you can feel like you're having a sexual experience and you're bringing that energy up and then you pause in that moment and you feel like fucking Superman, right?
Mm.
And you're pausing and everything becomes very still. You become way more focused, way more alert, like that super conscious state. And then you pause in that moment and then you feel that energy and you take it in, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
wow, that's interesting. How did that happen? It's the first time it happens, you're like, wow, I got this.
Yeah.
Now, the second part of it is like, how do you actually have the feeling of external ejaculatory orgasm, but not actually ejaculate, right?
Yes. I was just
And
thinking that.
that is like, that's the highest level, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's sort of like what everyone's looking for, right? Is that feeling of, and it happens sporadically and you can work on it, but it's all about like taking that experience and just continuing to keep those channels open and holding at the right moments so that you don't go too far, you
Mm.
know? And it's very delicate. It's a very nuanced balance. Like I go too far all the time. Like I'm not, it's
Yeah,
like,
sure.
it's just, I'm not like, oh, every time it's like boom, boom, boom. Sometimes you're like in that moment, you say stop. She doesn't stop. She keeps going a couple more thrusts and you're like, ah,
Yeah.
right? Like, cause it's a,
Yeah.
it's a two-way street.
A
It's,
nice edge. Yeah, absolutely.
and you're like, stop.
Yes.
Um, but that's the key is that we're all searching for this sort of internal orgasm, but you have to do specific things, right? You have to breathe a certain way. You have to use your hands and manipulate, around your cock and your balls a certain way, like
Yeah.
activating the perineum in a certain way. So there's things you have to do. You can't just be like, I'm gonna stop. I think
Yeah,
that's
right.
maybe the issue.
Mm.
Um, it's not just about stopping. It's about
Many so many
stopping
parts.
other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And
So,
look, like you don't always have to do it either. Sometimes you're in a moment and it's fucking great, and you're just like, let's just rock and roll, and you do your thing, uh,
mm,
and you do finish and you do complete because the moment calls for it.
yeah. What about like Kegels and exercises like you mentioned before, like weak hips and all the rest of it? I used to
Hmm.
poo-poo guys in the gym when they used to do those hip thrusts. I thought like that's just shit that girls do. But
Yeah.
but since watching like your content, I'm like, you know what? I've never wanted to hip thrust more in my life.
I
um,
love that. Thank
Develop
you.
that, like I either do it at wrestling or I,
Yeah.
it could benefit me both ways, So, but I do it with the intent to learn more things. But, you
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to talk about your app and your website and where everyone can go to learn from you. But, what's the benefit of kind of the Kegels or the exercises where you're kind of doing the hip thrust or you've got certain things that you do where you're in positions and you're kind of getting mobility in your back and your thighs and all that sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So first off, the Kegel, it's the most ill-informed exercise for men. Most guys think it's for women. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So the Kegel exercise has been like scientifically proven to help with ED, to help with premature release, and to help with prostate health.
Hmm.
Most men have a weak pelvic floor, right? And so the pelvic floor, if you're thinking about when you're edging or when you're in a sexual experience and you don't want to release, well, what's the thing that you have to do in order to not release? You got to close the
Right.
valve,
Hmm.
right? And if you have a weak valve closure, then you're never going to be able to last longer. You're not going to have strong blood flow to that region. So you could do a Kegel to activate a harder erection for ED, and you could do a Kegel to activate the closure of that valve so that you can, when you're in that moment and you're like, okay, I'm going to do it, and it's locked in, and then you breathe through that. So, Kegels are incredibly important. It's an everyday thing. it's like breathing. It's like eating, like men should be doing it for the rest of their lives. Which is why it's so important to have, a system and a technology where you can actually do it, regularly. Um, so that's the first part of like the most important muscle in the male body is the pubococcygeus. It's the PC and the BC muscles down there, for sexual health. The other stuff comes into play when you talk about hip mobility, right? And getting into, look, I have a background as a martial artist. I'm flexible. I can kick my leg over my head. I can do some splits and stuff like that. But for a lot of guys, we don't have a lot of hip mobility. And so it means that we're less capable in the bedroom of being able to maneuver, right? In certain ways. And so a lot of the stuff that I teach and I share is literally just it's hip flexion, it's hip rotation, it's getting into position so that you can develop that flexibility and that mobility and that strength in your adductors, which are the ones inside, that goes from your groin to your knees, that give you that flexibility and strength in ranges of motion so that you can be on a bed with your knees fully splayed and not have an issue,
Mm,
right? And getting into a position that you may not have been able to get into because you didn't have that mobility, right? So
absolutely.
what I do notice about a lot of guys is like they're kind of it's like one dimensional. They're good at a couple moves, and that's fine, I mean, then it's like, but if you want to have a little bit more range, you want to get those hips flexible, right, in all directions. And so that's the training stuff that I offer, guys. And so you see some of these women on the internet like doing these crazy things. Like men can do the same stuff. You know what I mean? It's all sort of part and parcel of it. We need to have hip mobility and flexion as well.
Mm.
Some of us may get there more easily. But it's a lot of it's like the Pilates and the yoga, like those lighter kind of movements that are going to get us into the positions that are going to be more beneficial in the
Yeah,
bedroom.
absolutely. And look, let's to be honest, like when you get to my age, like hip mobility is important. You don't
Well, yeah,
realize
it's for
just
general
how
health.
fucking good it is to have a
Yeah.
loose lower back, and
Yeah.
not have that sort of chronic pain in there. But I get it. I mean, I
Yeah.
think when we're talking to people's sex life, it tends to be a very narrow window of like opportunities to explore things, and things become stale very, very quickly,
Hmm.
particularly if you don't have a variety. And I think like innately we have maybe certain characteristics that like routine and like things to be the same, but also I think all of us have this innate sense of adventure and excitement and wanting things to be spontaneous and different. And particularly when you get into a long-term relationship, like it's just these are critical things. Like you just need to fucking,
Yeah.
you know,
You need
have
novelty.
yeah, absolutely. You need
Yeah.
to and make it top of mind. Otherwise it does become very clinical and very routine and
Hmm.
like we got to do it Tuesdays because that's the freest day. We've got no kids, and it's like fuck. You know what I mean? It's just you
Yeah.
desire when everything was so free and easy. And I think you can kind of cultivate that in a sense where it could be planned, but also, has a sense of spontaneity about it as well.
Yeah. And creating it right. It's like we work with what we have. You got three kids, you got two jobs, whatever it is. It's like, okay, cool, we got to do this. Sometimes it's a quickie. There's no opportunity for 30-minute long sessions unless
Sure.
you make plans for that. But yeah, anywhere you can create novelty creates more dopamine, creates more oxytocin and more connection, and gets rid of that like staleness, right, that we experience when we are with partners for longer periods of time.
Mm. Um, on one of your videos, you talk about lengthening your penis.
Yeah.
Just asking for a friend. Like, how does that I know you talk to it very convincingly, but I'm just
Yeah.
want to explore that whole thing. I think, probably to reflect back to the porn topic and things like that. Yeah, it's unfortunate that your experience is that you're watching these guys all fucking hung like
Yeah.
horses, and
Yeah.
you compare yourself and you develop for me personally, like a poor mindset around your body image
Yeah.
because you're just like, I'm not like these guys,
Yep.
and it's not like, you're super small, but at the same time, it's like it's not like that, you know. So
No, no, of course. Yeah. It's, we live in a culture where if porn is the place that people are looking for sex and normalize this, oh, well, all guys are like that. The answer is no. All guys are not like that. Average size is 5.5 inches when erect. I think there's like 2 billion men around the world that are less than that,
yeah,
just based on statistics and numbers and figures. Men develop tremendous amounts of low self-worth and low value as it relates to their penis size, flaccid and erect, from watching porn.
mm,
And that creates performance anxiety and lack of confidence in the bedroom. So it's just, again, one of those negative sliding scales where our young men are trained to think that like they're all LeBron James at basketball, but they're not. Right.
mm,
But you can't, yes, you can shoot a basketball. Yes, you have a penis, but like we're not all like that. Those guys were selected. They're in a movie. They're shooting for X number of hours, but we think that it's real. It's not real. Like Mission Impossible isn't real. We all know that. But we think that porn is like this real thing, technically, because you're watching it. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, I was working with the tantrika, and like, we were, she was basically teaching me about, different things that you can do and whatnot. But she was basically like, oh, like, you kind of like, curve to the left. I'm like, oh, interesting. She's like, yeah, you can actually like do exercises that would, straighten it out, and you actually can get more size. And I was like, huh? Like, I didn't know that. And so then I started this whole like research into like, well, what is penis skin and what's inside it and what other muscle fibers, and there's connective tissue, and there's the corpus cavernosa and all this sort of stuff. And then she pointed me in the direction of like some, these oils that you can use that hydrate the skin, moisturize the skin, and then exercises that you can do to stretch and pull in all the different variations, right? So people have heard of like gelking. That's just sort of one direction that you can do it. But the whole point is that skin stretches, right? And like when you see someone who's super fat and they get skinny, you can see the rolls. That's because skin is the only organ in our body that stretches. And so I basically started doing a lot of these exercises. I was like, cool, who doesn't want to get bigger? Like I've never met a guy who's like, no, I'm good. You
thank
know?
you.
Yeah. Even I've got guys who are like 9.5 inches, like, I want to get to 10. I'm like,
Ugh,
really?
the number.
Like, like, really? Do you need to? Do you need to? But that's just funny. That's the psyche of men, right?
Sure. More
So
power.
started doing, these putting the oils on, which hydrate, moisturize, and create more blood flow and circulation to those areas, and then doing these exercises that I learned. Um, and then, over time, like, it doesn't take a week. It takes weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, just like anything that you have to become, really skilled at, especially when it comes to manipulating your body. And then I started to look at some of the science behind it from like plastic surgeons, when they do skin grafts. So like
Mhm.
skin stretches, but when you have skin that stretches, what happens with skin is that new cells form in that stretched skin. So if you're manually manipulating the skin over time, over and over again with these stretching routines, with blood flow, hydration, circulation, oxygenation, etc., that you get from these oils, over time, the capacity for your penis to grow longer and wider, it exists. It
Yeah,
just takes
right.
time, right? And so the corpus cavernosa can stretch, your veins can stretch, all of the stuff in there can stretch. Um, but guys are like, oh, you're getting like 2 inches in a month. Like, guess what? That's not going to happen. You don't get super fat in a month, and you don't build from 17-inch biceps to 20-inch biceps in a month either. That
Mm.
takes time. So I just draw a lot of like, okay, cool. Because you see the guys with the weights on their penis in Africa and all that sort of stuff. And you've got the devices that you can wear when you're sleeping.
Yeah,
It's just about consistent elongation of skin tissue for a period of time with the right, oils and stuff like that that can help
what the hell?
um, with like the growth part of it, right? Like tissue repair with like micro tears, and
Yes.
then how do we get oxygenation and blood flow to those tears to create more cells, more fibers, i.e., bigger capacity? That's
Yeah.
essentially how it works.
Right. And like obviously everyone's going to be different, but what
Mhm.
would one expect over, I don't know, a 6 or 12 month time period to sort of improve in the length of the penis?
Yeah.
Is there like do you have any evidence about this or do you
Yeah, I mean, look, like
small
I would
thing?
say it's impossible over time to grow more than 2 inches. I just think that's just not biologically possible with it relates to your penis.
Yeah.
If you do the exercises consistently, you have a good workout routine, and you're doing all this stuff like over a 6 to 12 month period, like half inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch, like if you really do it properly. But
Mm,
that's like, every day for a year, right? Not a lot of people have the ability to do things like that consistently.
yeah.
And
And
then
also,
birth,
Jackson, like if you were to like ask any man, would a half to an inch extra be desirable? I mean, like it's just like that's
it's exponential.
yeah, it's exponential. That's
I
that's
tell
more
guys,
than
I'm
like
like,
17 to 20-inch biceps. That's massive.
yeah. I was like, you go a quarter of an inch bigger, you're gonna be fucking smiling out the wazoo. People, you walking down the street, people are like, what's that guy on? Right? So I'd say, like, look, like anything helps. It also helps with flaccid, size, and sort of creating more like heaviness,
Mm,
But it's all about hydration, right? Hydration of the tissues, right?
yeah,
And that's the key. It's like when you hydrate your tissues properly and you have the right blood flow, healthy diet, all these things matter, right?
mm,
You're able to increase the size, over time, but it takes time, you
yeah.
know.
So does that put a lot of distrust into like any of the pills that kind of go take this and it'll grow? Because I mean, I know you talk to like nitric oxide and blood flow and maybe herbs and certain things. I know you've got products that
Mhm.
promote all of that as well, but the one doesn't go without the other from what you're telling me, right? Like
Yeah,
it's just
it's a complete system. It's a
sure.
complete system. You need to take the internal herbs that help with blood flow internally to those regions, right? And oxygenation, nitric oxide. You take the oil topically, and you do the exercises.
Yeah.
You have a healthy lifestyle. So it's like you have to do all the things. You can't just put the oil on and your
Yeah.
dick magically grows. That doesn't
Yeah.
happen like
You can't go to
that.
the gym and eat like shit, and you can't sort of
Right. Like,
sit at home and eat protein and your muscles grow.
yeah. So
Yeah,
it's a
sure.
system. That's why I tell people like, yeah, you take the pills, but you also use the oil and you do the exercises and you do it consistently for a period of time, you will see results. Like that is for sure. Um, but
Mm.
not just one. And that's why all these companies out there are like, oh, you take this pill and grow 4 inches. I'm like, who actually would believe that?
Yeah, a lot of people because they're
Well,
just
unfortunately, right? That's
yeah,
that's
you're
the
sort of
problem with our
dangling a
culture.
carrot there. That's just like you said, it's a primal desire. I think of like most men is just a
Yeah.
and in the culture that we've grown up with is um, it's promoting that. Like, it's almost, I don't know. For me, it's like, the bigger muscles you are, the more intimidating you are. I don't know, it's
Yeah.
part of your ego that kind of, is wanting to, I guess, come out in some way, shape, or form. But
Yeah. And
yeah,
it is. It's societal, it's cultural, it's from porn. A bigger phallus, like, is it a sign of more virility? Like, is it more attractive and appealing to a female on some biological level? Maybe,
sure.
right? But like at the end of the day, that's just not how we're all made. And so we have to understand that yes, those exist, just like giants exist, guys that are just super, human. I go to this gym in Miami and like there's a guy who's 6'11" and he's
Yeah,
like
fuck.
10 pounds. And he's just, and I look at him, I'm just like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah,
how do
yeah.
you get that big? I mean, he's on steroids, but I was like, how do you
Sure.
get that big? Right. But like some people are just naturally bigger. So,
Yeah.
but again, it's about accepting and like who we are and what we were given and like
Mm.
the psychology that comes with that, knowing that we can support it and that it can improve with work and dedication. But like realizing like, cool, like this is where I'm at. And like I have a lot of other qualities that are amazing, right? As a
Yeah,
man,
sure.
that we bring to the table.
Mm. Look, probably a good topic that I'd love for you to speak to is, I guess, like a minute ago, I said, growing up with porn, you tend to develop a poor self-image. I personally have worked through that because even on many levels. Like I was bullied through high school.
Hmm.
I was training with some weights and things like that. My dad bought a home gym, never fucking used it, so I just got on there and started lifting weights. But it was almost like a mentality of mine. It was that I'm my motivation to get bigger and more muscular was to dominate anyone that would come my way, so I could build this sort of shell of protection.
Hmm.
Uh, if I extended that into my own body image and my own self image, self worth, self value, as you put it before, it's in terms of that connection with porn and things like that. It plagued me for many decades. Like it's almost embarrassing to admit that something that could affect me psychologically, and on a level that was kind of like brewing up.
Mm,
Um, so I want to talk about cultivating confidence as a man and the things that you can do in and outside of the bedroom that will help you build a foundation of, this sort of alpha energy, this, big dick energy that people sort of talk about, and, all of these terms that everyone goes on about, a guy having a strong masculine presence. I know we live in a world at the moment that it's almost like everything is against. I'm not isolating men, but it seems to me as a man, like I'm probably skewed more towards things are against men to make you smaller, weaker, fatter, stupid, more controllable. Testosterone rates are, plummeting through the ground. We've got all these microplastics and seed oils and everything, atrazine and all this kind of shit in the water that's just fucking with our systems. So I just wanted to speak to that. And before you answer, perhaps you can add something in, which is maybe about communication with your partner if you have one, those
mhm.
sorts of things, because that's probably something that's been a game changer for me is finding a partner that really has admiration and appreciation and respect and adoration for who you are as a person, but also like in the bedroom, like if you have someone who kind of, I don't know, the word is like, I've heard this
Negs
sort of
you?
cock worship, sort of come,
Mm.
it's almost like if they really appreciate the intimacy and everything that's involved in all of that. I don't know, as a man, it's almost like the best gift that you can be given in terms of just giving you the energy and the vitality and the appreciation for who you are. When someone loves on you that way, it kind of levels up your game, and it's almost like I don't know, the missing piece of the puzzle that you were always, desiring, I guess. But anyway,
Mhm.
it's again long-winded question. I never asked for it,
Yeah.
but can
Yeah,
we?
so the I'll focus on the last part of it first. There's nothing better than finding a woman who knows how to treat you the way that you need to be treated, right? The vast majority of men, we receive love through physical touch and words of affirmation. That's the majority of us, not all of us, but the majority. When a woman knows how to connect with us in that way, especially in the bedroom, our ability and our desire to connect with them, to provide for them, to be a better partner, to be a better lover, to learn, to open, explore, like it just like expands, right? There's something about a woman's love and adoration that has the ability to move us in a very material way, in a positive direction. Um, there's a huge difference between a woman that's like negging you and competing with you than a woman who's like, you are the fucking man, and like I love being with you. It's just guys are just like, oh wow, this is incredible. And vast majority of the time they reciprocate that behavior, back towards her. Not always, but most of the time. Um, so that like rings true. But you talked about something at the beginning, which was, confidence, right? How do you get that woman? You know?
Mm,
And I think, you discussed your story of, you know, you were bullied, you used weights because you wanted to develop this physical shell of like, okay, I'm strong, so I can sort of defend myself physically. Um, but like the reality is most of us grow up never really learning about who we are, what our values are, right? And so when you talk about confidence, what I really say is like it has nothing to do with how strong you are. Being strong can give you confidence, but is it real confidence? Not necessarily.
mm,
But like, how much time are we spending understanding ourselves? What are our values? What are our morals? What are our opinions, right? How do we see the world and how do we view the world? The closer you are to understanding that about yourself, your truthful alignment across all those spectrums, that is going to give you a very, very clear understanding of who you are in the world. That gives you confidence because this is how I see things. This is how I view things. This is my opinion on things. And then taking actions, right, that are based and rooted in those values that you have and those characteristics that you have when you are out in the world, meeting people in business with women, etc. A woman is attracted to a man who knows who the fuck he is. right? If a man knows who he is, he may not be attractive or appealing to all women because of his stance, but like there's a certain number of women that are going to be into that guy, right? Because he knows what he wants. This is how he acts. This is how he does. He doesn't need to be the richest. He doesn't need to be the best looking, but he's grounded in his knowingness of himself. He has cultivated his essence. We live in a culture and a society where like not a lot of guys know how to cultivate that because they're constantly seeking social media and they're out in the world comparing themselves to all these other things. None of that shit matters, right? How do you develop your essence? You learn about yourself. You go on fucking retreats. You go into the wild. You go test yourself doing hard things. All these things that we want to do as humans, like you have to do that, right? And then you develop real confidence that isn't just like, yes, I have big biceps and I can, bench press a lot. Because that's not real confidence. Real confidence is I know who the fuck I am, right? And all the decisions that I'm making in my life are in alignment with that. Then that attracts the energy of a partner who hopefully will treat us in the bedroom like with this adoration, right? And that's that leading, that presence, that mentality of a man who's like, hey, I'm going to make a decision. And like, it may not be the thing that the best thing in the world, but like, this is the decision that I'm making and here's why, right? That's what we're sort of moving forward towards. And, you also brought up something about the way that men are in the world and sort of feminism and attacking and toxic masculinity and all this shit. Like, I think men are really afraid to exercise their masculinity these days as much as they were in the past because of the Me Too stuff, because we have digital dating apps. We're not going out in the world and learning those natural seduction skills, right? We're behind a computer screen and saying swipe left, swipe no, and texting and shit like that.
Mm.
So there was a lot to your question, there's a lot to the answer, but that's kind of the stuff that I really want to encourage men to do is like figure out who you are. Spend time with yourself, spend time in nature, spend time in physical pursuits, spend time in mental pursuits, whatever it is. Just know this is who you are. And then that energy permeates and it attracts a partner who's into that. And then you can move in that realm, together.
Yeah, well said.
Thanks.
Hey, Jackson, um, tell me about your app and your trainings and all those sorts of things, just so people can get a better understanding of like if they've listened this far and they're liking what they're hearing, then they can go ahead and start to learn a lot more and dive a little deeper into your coaching.
Yeah. So I created basically, I had a lot of digital courses that people could, view, that men could view. And what I realized is that the accountability, the training, the affirmations, the positive sort of feedback, the oxytocin building stuff was
Mhm.
really only achievable through an app experience. And so I basically created an app for men that is quit porn, Kegels trainer, sexual fitness, positions library, Jackson AI, where it's like an all-in-one encompassing app, and it's called Better Man. And we're actually in app review right now, which is exciting. So
Nice.
it's a place where men can go to satisfy all of the things that we talked about, right? Which is like quitting porn, doing Kegels and getting rid of PEED, etc., learning sexual positions for sexual fitness, and things like that. And also all my courses and programs are in there for sort of the viewers to watch along. And it's kind of like I wanted to create something that would be available for men, 15, 16, 17, but like also like who are older, right? Who have these issues and problems that they want to get rid of. So I basically saw what was out there in individual apps. I built what I believe is a better one, and then I put them all in the same environment so that a guy can come in, he's got a daily score, he can get points, and there's this interactivity experience where it's not just like trying harder to quit porn. I actually have breathworks, meditations, affirmations that build dopamine in those moments where you are like, wow, I'm really struggling. What do I do? Right. So I created this sort of like very gamified experience through the app, all in an effort to make men better, right? To like enhance and improve our lives.
I love it. Well, man,
Thank
this has
you.
been a really good conversation. I've
Yeah, man,
enjoyed
this is fun
every
fun. I
moment.
appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm really glad we got to connect. There's a lot that people can take away from this, and I'd encourage anyone to at least follow you on Instagram and just get to know you as I've done. And I think they'll be really pleasantly surprised with all the information that you offer very freely. Like I said, I think we I resonate with you. I think our values are very similar. Our
Hmm.
approaches and views on the world are as well. So it helps me kind of gravitate towards people that are, like-minded.
Hmm.
Because like, there's people in your space which are, I don't know, men and women. They kind of, I don't know, they've got their own thing about them, I guess, and I respect all of that. Sometimes it's a little full on. It's kind of like really, I don't know, esoteric, and on the other side, it's kind of really crude and kind of like not vulgar, but like heading
I
towards
know
that.
you're talking about,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You've got a nice, demeanor and very respectful sort of vibe about you. Seem very casual, very cruisy.
Thank
But
you.
at the same time, like you come from this energy of like a positive intent to help men improve and change, not like a Tate type vibe where you just like crush and dominate your enemies and fuck women and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really appreciate it about you,
Thank
man.
you.
Yeah, looking forward to maybe circling back sometime in the future and we can have another discussion. It'd be great.
I love that. Where are you based in Australia, by the way?
I'm in New South Wales. Have you ever been to Australia?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, right. So I'm on the south coast. It's a
Okay. Got it.
beautiful part of the world. So if you think of,
Nice.
where Sydney is, I'm kind of
Hmm.
like an hour and a half away from Sydney,
South.
on the
Okay.
coastline. Yeah,
Nice.
so it's a magic spot.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Love
beautiful
it.
beaches, cruisy, sort of sleepy town, that sort of thing. And yeah, so I've grown up here all my life. It's a beautiful place.
Love it. Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you for having me on. You asked some amazing questions and yeah, I love it. Just a good like riff conversation. It's a fantastic vibe.
Yeah, amazing. All right, bro.
Cool.
You have a great
Adrian,
day, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Okay.
thank you so much, Adrian. Take care,
All
brother.
right, man. Take
All
care.
right. Bye.